All right, so we're back with another Simpsons Unhinged. This will be number 14 on our list. So here's the seasons we've already covered and the episodes. We covered the famous season 23 episode Lisa Goes Gaga, which a lot of people say is the worst ever because Lady Gaga does her Christ-like thing and basically it likes to shit on Lisa. Season 19's that 90s show basically tries to make us remember that Marge didn't have Bart after high school. There had to be some kind of rift and all that. Of course, Homer turns into a grunge musician. Marge falls in love with her college professor. Season 24 is the episode with Bongo that Homer had attraction to this dog Bongo because, after all, Mona did leave Abe. And Bongo was in trouble for fighting Mr. Burns. Grandpa got punished because of it, but Homer just couldn't trust Grandpa and dogs. Season three's Homer at the Bat. We talked about this episode beating the Cosby Show first run, and it was just unbelievable. Making sure the Cosby Show lost its steam, and of course when the Simpsons were on Thursdays. Season 21 is the Olympics episode. We covered that one, of course, in Vancouver because Canadian Pride and Olympic Pride as well. Season 11's Maud's Death. We talked about that one, of course, how it turned Ned into an overbearing parent and basically was one of the worst moments of Jerkass Homer. Season 15, tis the 15th season, is when Homer gets in trouble for finding an astrolabe and vows to be the nicest man around. But Ned gets jealous of Homer's redemption arc and wants to outdo Homer, causing some friction. Season 9, the Principal and the Pauper. Yes, of course, the episode that dropped the shark. We talked about that and how, it just ruined the golden age of The Simpsons and, it ruined a good character. Season 5's Homer and Apu. We talked about Apu living with the Simpsons after Homer inadvertently gets Apu fired, and who needs to quickie Marty and all that. Season 7's Lisa the Vegetarian. We talked about the episode that really had a massive character shift, and Lisa turns vegetarian, and how maybe the Simpsons were going to trying to wait out Paul McCartney's death. Love is the Many Strangled Thing. I talked about that episode from season 22. And basically, the Simpsons were trying to say that it's justified that Homer needs to strangle Bart. And it's like, well, he doesn't really need to strangle Bart. Negative reinforcement's one thing, but strangle is another thing. And I also talked about how they're pushing it modern. So, season 31, we talked about Todd have Forsaken Me, in which Ned really goes into flanderization and basically bans Todd for not believing in God for, thinking that God killed Maud inadvertently. And how Lisa was such a prick and tried to get people to Buddhism and basically thinks that she's under pressure from the Buddha. Yeah, right. And of course, last Sunday we talked about season 35's Lisa gets an F1 when she becomes a go kart racer, and how in some way Homer and Marge switch parental roles. Homer is the nervous parent, and Marge is the caring parent. Today we're going to take a look at a season 16 episode, which is controversial in a lot of people's minds. The topic is not why I'm pissed off with this episode. It's something else, and I will reach that. But of course, we're going to be talking about season 16's There's Something About Marrying and how big it is. Jerk Homer, Marge's worries, Bart's pranks, Lisa's causes, Maggie not talking a lot, Grandpa being senile, Patty and Selma boring Marge, Artie Sif is a jerk, Chief Wiggum making things happen, Mr. Burns being a dick. You can never stop the Simpsons. Heaven knows they've been trying for years and they still come back for more. 37 seasons is a bit much, don't you think? It's a crazy Simpsons. Something happens. A do 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 do. This is not a clip show. Have no fear. I've got topics for years. All right, so what does the sign says? If you're watching the video portion, you'll see the Springfield welcoming gay since 2005. Well, I'll tell you what it is. So anyway, the episode starts. Well, we're talking about season 16. There's something about marrying that happened the week after the Super Bowl 2005. In this episode, Bart and Milhouse are upset because no one in town would take their pranks at face value. So basically, they try to figure someone else. So this tourist comes in who doesn't give his name, comes in and off of a turnip truck. Of course, that's a euphemism. And Bart and Milhouse proceed to decide to hurt this guy and make him feel the pain of Springfield. Of course, Hoosier gets mad and shames him, does the shame thing, and all that. The bullies throw food at them. In a parody of the Today Show, we find out that this guy was Howard Hoosier, who is a guy who um, does like these reports on American towns, gives Springfield a terrible grade, and everyone thinks that this will ruin Springfield tourism. Homer then shows a map of Springfield, his map of Springfield, to the audience and breaks the fourth wall by saying, "Are you done with it?" Sure enough, Springfield gets no tourism dollars, and basically they're broke, as almost always. So they try everything to try to fix what happened, and practically Lisa says, "Why don't we allow gay marriage?" Because at the time in 2005, not every state was okay with gay marriage. Canada was decently okay with it, not completely, but in a decent thing. But the fact of the matter is that it could bring tourism. Nelson suggests they do gay funerals and points at Martin as one of them. And Martin says, "I'm not gay. I don't know what I am yet." "Oh, Martin, you probably are going to have a relationship with a robot." Nevertheless, Springfield tries to sell themselves on everything. Unfortunately, Reverend Lovejoy refuses to marry the gay couples and all that. Marge tries to knock some sense into him, but he rings a bell to distract them. And Mayor Quimby is upset because Reverend Lovejoy can easily make lots of money off of the marriages. Homer sees those people as dollar bills and basically said those people do have a right. The right to give me a big screen TV. And strangely as it sounds, Homer actually was carrying a sign that says death before gay marriage. However, we'll get to that. We'll get more into that Homer symbolism later. But nevertheless, Homer decides to become an online minister. It's easier than he thinks. And then he gets duped by a talking moose for a credit card number. Homer's childlike wonder, am I right? So anyway, Homer marries a lot of people and all that. And basically he's doing it for the money. Of course, you know how Homer basically sells out his place for the almighty dollar. But that's not the first or last time. So as is, Homer then starts worrying because no one is marrying. Gay marrying. So basically, Homer could marry straight people, but doesn't think interesting. He wants to think about Lenny and Carl, but Marge tells him that Lenny and Carl have to fix everything for themselves because, everyone thinks that they're a couple. Not. Anywho, so Homer decides to marry anyone to anything and tries to keep the money train going. He does defend himself on Smartline with Kent Brockman to Reverend Lovejoy and all that. So that's basically what happens in all that. So anyway, we find out that Patty comes in and wants to get married officiated by Homer, and tells Marge that the person's name is Veronica. Veronica is a girl's name. Yes, of course it's a girl's name. I'm gay, Marge. And basically, Homer then adds in before we go to commercial break. Here's a shocker, Marge. I love beer. Well, you may have a good gaydar or gay radar, but anyhow, lots of people have that good radar. Nevertheless, Homer and Marge are shocked and all that. Patty then tells Marge that she always felt like being gay. And Marge thought she saw the signs. The signs we see is that Marge likes to wear, as a kid, liked to wear cute feminine clothing, while Patty dressed up like a construction worker Marge had a David Cassidy poster. Patty had a Miss Hathaway poster from the Beverly Hillbillies, and then in Sleepless in Seattle, Marge watches it, but Patty makes out with a girl. Marge's obliviousness is bad. I mean, it's kind of strange. What about Selma? Like, how does she react to this? Nevertheless, Patty and Veronica decide to have dinner with the family. So Homer isn't sure if Marge is okay with this marriage and all that. Marge feels a little awkward and all that. Nevertheless, they come over. Well, Bart makes a comment about Marge dating the first blimp she met. Homer says, correction, the first blimp that got her pregnant. And then Bart shows genuine concern for Homer, but Homer then throttles him, goes, why you? And then he has to answer the door. He asks Lisa to hold his place and throttling Bart, but they're both uncomfortable. So anyway, Patty and Veronica meet the family and all that. Patty throws a couple of cigarette butts, even one in Homer's eye, and then says that on a crusty celebrity golf tour, she met Veronica because Veronica was a playing partner of Krusty, who makes jokes about ladies golf. And then Veronica decides to throw the club at Krusty, but misses and hits Patty. And Patty basically falls in love with Veronica. So anyway, Marge still has no clue how to react. And Patty tells Marge that, this is a family thing. You gotta love each other. And practically she says that you have to be there for me, Marge, because if not, then the next time we'll meet, it will be at Homer's funeral, because she hopes it's pretty much there. So anyhow, Selma actually shows some jealousy towards Patty and all that, saying that, I can't believe you're getting married. Patty says, why are you so jealous? You got married 3 times. Well, there was this one episode, remember when Apu was getting his green card? Homer wanted Selma to marry Apu so that he could get his green card. But Selma says, I will not be Selma Bouvier, Terwilliger Huts, no, Hasapima, whatever it is. No, sorry. And then I forgot to add McClure in front of Huts. So she married Lionel Hutz off screen. Of course, true Simpsons fans know that she married Satchel Bob in season 2, or tried to. And Satchel Bob just wanted to kill her, but failed miserably because Bart foiled him. And then, of course, the McClure one is when she marries Troy McClure, but Troy McClure uses her because he has that fish fetish and all that. So anyway, yeah, so Selma then sheepishly says she got married a 4th time. And then we find that Disco Stew says, Disco Stew just got an annulment from John Paul II. Boogie down. We find out that, Disco Stew is Catholic? What's even more impressive was that they talked about John Paul II. Of course, how would we know 2 months later he would die and all that? Nevertheless, The Simpsons notwithstanding, Patty can't take Selma's stuff and Marge's stuff. But Marge finds Veronica shaving herself, and not a subtle, not like a small one, but a subtle one. Nevertheless, the marriage ceremony goes on. Marge finally snaps, says, I can't do this. And then Patty yells at her, saying that she just thinks that everyone should marry a big slob like Homer. I mean, let's look at it this way. Patty and Selma basically pushed Marge into this marriage with Homer. But Marge says, it's not that. Veronica is a man. And then exposes Veronica's Adam's apple because Veronica wanted to be on the ladies' tour so badly so that she could play professional golf. It does happen from time to time that guys trying to turn into the ladies' tour. John Van de Velde, the guy who blew the 99 British Open, allegedly once tried to get onto the female British LPGA circuit. But anyhow, Veronica says that, Patty should marry the man he is, Leslie Swisher. Patty then says, "Hell no, I like girls," and everyone cheers. Patty then tells Marge, "Thank you for preventing me from making a big mistake." Marge then goes on the record saying, "Just because you're a lesbian doesn't mean you're less of a being." And basically, Lisa then says, "Well, that's the end of Homer's marriage thing because, now that Homer will grow tired." However, in the end credits, we find out that he's marrying people like Captain McAllister to a mermaid ship thing and Ralph to a tiger with a bow tie. So let's just make sure I didn't miss anything. Did you know that? Yeah. So, anyway, that's what happened and all that. Of course, there's a lot of things going on. Yep. Okay. Yep. 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 Okay. So yeah, nothing too damaging. All right, I've got everything right. Okay, so now let's talk about the one thing that has pissed me off. Now I know that the topic of gay marriage is going to make people cringe, but there's one thing that ticks me off about this episode, and it's not the obvious, and I'm going to tell you about it right now. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. It's like this. How does this offend you? Cutter, how does this offend you? Well, I'm going to tell you this before, obviously, I get into the whole point of this episode. This was the couch gag in which the Simpsons actually have the Stanley Cup and are parading around with it. You may be thinking, how is that bad? You're Canadian. You love this bad. Well, it's a double dose of stupidity. Because it's like they have the Stanley Cup and they're basically holding it over the heads of every Canadian Simpson fan because at the time of this episode in 2005, the Canadian teams didn't win the Stanley Cup since 1993. So since the Habs in 1993, the Canadians, yeah, and won the Stanley Cup, and that was the last time a Canadian team held the Stanley Cup. At the time of the episode, only in '94 and 2004 were Canadian teams in the finals. That being Vancouver and Calgary, respectively. But worst of all, after this episode, Canadian teams have tried a few times to make the Stanley Cup Finals and made it, but can't win the cup. So Canada has been without the cup by a Canadian team since 1993. And second of all, this was the season or the year that the NHL didn't even play. In 2004-05, the NHL players and owners were at an impasse over a salary cap, and it ruined the season. And in fact, it was the only time in Big Four sports history, baseball, basketball, football, hockey, that a major league season never happened. So basically, and this was days before the NHL actually said we are canceling the '05 season. So basically, they were just sticking it up hockey lovers' asses. I mean, hockey's big in most parts of the states too, but it's just basically shining a dangling FU to Canadian sports fans everywhere. So I said my piece about that, and now let's go back to the main message. Okay, so back to the main thing about Springfield and gay marriage. Yeah, 2005, not every state was happy with gay marriage. I think only like 6 or 7 were okay with it. And parts of Canada were okay with it. Not the whole country of Canada, but parts of Canada, to be honest. It took years for both things to happen. So there's a lot of themes, and two massive themes come to mind. Number one, and the most important one, is Homer selling out for the almighty dollar. Now, Homer does have principles that, he holds on to, but money sometimes makes him change his principles. One such example of Homer's principles is, of course, this episode in which he sells out for the almighty dollar because he gets to realize that, hey, you know what? These people have a right to give him money for a big screen TV and all that, but he wants to go bigger and better every time. So basically, money just, you know, blinds Homer. But I mean, it's simple to see. I mean, Homer doesn't know when to say when. He could stop at any time and it could work, but he keeps going. He pushes it until he pushes it too far. I mean, look at the family finances. Homer when he works at Burns's plant, actually doesn't get paid a lot. But it is Mr. Burns, and Homer does burn his bridges too many times to count. Marge rarely gets a job outside the house because she has some kind of clinginess to Maggie. I don't know what it is. I mean, Bart and Lisa are kids, so they can't contribute financially. But yeah, but Homer's gay beliefs, are on full display. I mean, he held the sign saying death before gay marriage, but it makes sense. Now, of course, I'm going to talk about the two episodes, and they will not be covered in this series. The first episode is Homer's Phobia. I love Homer's Phobia. It's a great episode and all that. And maybe it will make the season 8 thing. But bottom line is that, we're talking about gay marriage and gay rights and all that. And I usually don't do the same topic twice in this series. So, of course, Homer finds out that John the antique dealer is gay. Marge tells him that. Homer has a good time with John, but Marge just had to spoil it for him. Unfortunately, it sets in motion Homer's phobia and fears and basically thinking that Bart might turn gay. So he does everything he can to try to keep Bart hetero and all that. But fortunately, John saves Homer and the hunting party from reindeer and all that. Homer then turns around and tells Bart that any way you want to live is okay by me. Bart's like, what's he saying? Lisa says he thinks you're gay. I think Lisa basically knew that she had to tell Bart the truth because, she didn't want to sugarcoat it. And then, of course, Three Gays of the Condo, the episode in which we saw Homer, go to live with a couple of gay roommates because when they try to find a puzzle piece, he looks in Marge's closet and finds a memory chest in which she was about to break up with Homer. Homer wonders then why didn't she do it? But then he finds a doctor's card and realizes that Marge only stayed with Homer because she was pregnant with Bart. Obviously, she didn't want Bart to be a bastard. So Homer takes that. Finally, he gets by her. He actually does stay with Kirk in his singles thing, but basically the men cry out for their wives, and Homer is upset. So he goes to a gay thing, and then he even says, when he may be roommates with those two, he said, what will win out, my old-fashioned prejudices or my newfound acceptance? Well, Homer kind of accepted the gay culture, but he still had a little bit of a stance against gay marriage. And that's okay. Like not everyone appreciates gay marriage, so we have to take it with a grain of salt. And second of all, to finish this video off, let's talk about the whole thing about Patty being out of the closet. Was it noticeable? Did people think that Patty was going to come out of the closet? I think so. I think it was just basically not much of a shock. Of course, we all know about the Who Shot Mr. Burns scenario, but the fact of the matter is that, yeah, and Maggie being the culprit, basically, it was purposeful. Everyone knew that it would be the last person you think it would be. But this time, it was more painfully obvious who was coming out of the closet. Everyone said there was going to be an episode with a character coming out of the closet. Everyone thought it would be Smithers because Smithers possesses that charm. They even alluded to it in that 138th episode spectacular about what's the real deal with Waylon Smithers. But of course, Troy McClure sugarcoats it. He's not gay at all. He doesn't have fantasies about Burns. Yeah, right. And I'm Robert Redford. But the fact of the matter is that, it had to be Patty. Patty shows signs of not being with guys and all that. And it just shocks everyone. Yeah, she had a fling with Principal Skinner, but only because Homer was told by Marge to set Selma up with a guy. But that was because Selma was upset over losing this guy named Stanley to a girl. Like, Stanley was Selma's coworker, and basically Patty shoved her way into Selma's life and all that. And basically, Selma feels that she's being pushed around. It does speak for how Patty kind of controls Selma and all that. I mean, everyone was upset that the Simpsons Fury YouTube channel did an episode about Selma always being pushed by Patty and all that. In season 37, this season that just passed, they actually alluded to it, that Selma is upset with Patty and all that, and accuses Patty of basically pushing her way into Selma's life and all that. So they actually do fix the problem with Patty and Selma living in the same apartment complex, but in different rooms. So practically, they're together, but they can respect each other's privacy. But nevertheless, yeah, Patty seemed to not be with guys and all that. She tries, but she fails. Remember the episode Jaws Wired Shut? Simpsons fans will know this one. Jaws Wired Shut was the episode in which Homer has to have his jaw wired shut because he hit a statue of Dredger Tatum. And then Homer soon learns to be more attentive to his family. But it actually pushes Marge over the edge because she just can't be the cool one. But, that's another day. But remember the part when the Simpsons find out about the Springfield gay parade and all that, and then there's a float in which two people are talking behind a closed door. We're gay, we're proud. Just don't tell mom and dad. The male voice and the female voice. Those two sounded familiar. Well, they are kind of familiar. It's not alluded that it is actually Patty and Smithers who are doing that, but their voices are iconic. And yes, they both came out of the closet. So that was that. I think people thought about that Jaws Wire Shut thing and realized it sounds like Patty. Maybe she's coming out of the closet. Everyone figured it was Patty. I mean, good on them for having a gay character and all that. But, it was just too obvious. It wasn't Who Shot Mr. Burns contest time. It was just basically normal contest. Everyone knew it was Patty. Although everyone wanted Smithers. And I did too. So anyway, that's the end of this episode. Next week, we go to season 32. And we do a unheralded episode. So much so that it almost made season 32 obsolete. And I would have had to scramble to find another episode. But we're going to season 32. We're going to go talk about one person who I think her death has been glossed over and try to bring some closure. So, ha! It's Edna Krabappel. We're going to talk about Edna's seemingly last episode of The Simpsons. Not as a character, but as a guidance thing. We're going to talk about season 32's Diary Queen. Join me next week. I'm Jeff Diamond. Adieu.